I didn't mean to end up in her apartment. And I definitely didn't mean to stay. It started with a simple knock, hers. The hallway smelled faintly of rain and someone's burnt toast. And when I opened my door, she was standing there with a small frown and a phone in her hand. "Do you know anything about door hinges?" she asked, like it was a casual question to a stranger and not an invitation into her private world. I'd seen her around before. Groceries in one arm, keys clinking in her hand, but never this close. She was older than me, mid-40s maybe, with the kind of presence that made you straighten without realizing. Not the loud kind of beautiful, the kind that pulled you in before you could look away. Her apartment was warm in a way mine wasn't. Not just in temperature, it felt lived in. A plant drooped in the corner, books stacked on the coffee table, a mug with lipstick faintly on the rim. I followed her into the living room, telling myself I was here to help with the door, nothing else. We talked while I worked, if you could call it talking. She asked about my classes. I told her I wasn't sure if I'd stick with them. I asked about her work. She smiled like she was leaving out the interesting parts. Every so often our eyes would meet for a moment too long, and then she'd glance away like she'd said something she shouldn't. Should have been quick. Tighten a few screws, check the latch, and I'd be on my way. But when I tried to leave, the doorknob gave a stubborn rattle. Her eyebrows lifted. "You've got to be kidding me." We both tried. Twist, jiggle, pull, nothing. The lock had slipped, and without the right key from the outside, we weren't going anywhere. For a second, the air changed. She looked at me, really looked at me, like we'd just been dropped into a different version of the afternoon. "Well," she said softly, "I guess you're stuck here." I laughed too quickly. "Guess so." She disappeared into the kitchen and came back with 2 glasses of water. We sat across from each other, the ticking of a clock filling the silence between sentences. Every time her knee shifted, mine noticed. Every time she tucked her hair behind her ear, my focus followed. She asked me something about my family. I answered, then realized she was studying my face as if the answer mattered more than I thought. I found myself asking about hers. She didn't tell me much, but the way her fingers traced the rim of her glass told me there were stories she didn't share often. The minutes turned heavier, like the room had its own weight. I don't know if it was the closeness or the quiet or the way her perfume seemed to settle into the air, but I couldn't stop glancing at her mouth. She caught me once, and instead of looking away, she held my gaze just long enough for my pulse to trip over itself. Then she smiled, slow, careful. "You really don't mind staying, do you?" she asked. Her tone made it sound less like a question and more like a test. And for the first time all afternoon, I didn't bother pretending. "No," I said, my voice lower than I meant. "I don't mind." She leaned back in her chair, still watching me. The clock kept ticking. The door stayed locked. And for reasons I couldn't explain, I hoped it stayed that way. The clock on her wall ticked past the hour, but neither of us made a move toward the door. It wasn't just the lock keeping me here. It was her. The danger of it was obvious, even if we didn't name it. She wasn't just older. She was my landlord. Technically, she could raise my rent or end my lease. She'd never given me a reason to worry before, but the rules between us were clear. Until now. She leaned on the kitchen counter, her fingers wrapped around her glass. "You don't seem in a rush," she said. "I'm not," I answered before thinking. Her eyes flickered, like she'd just confirmed something. I watched her move around the kitchen. Not gracefully, exactly, but with that quiet assurance of someone who'd lived alone long enough to know exactly where everything belonged. A strand of hair slipped loose and brushed her cheek. She didn't notice, but I did. It was ridiculous, the things I noticed. The faint smudge of ink on her left hand. The tiny chip in her thumbnail. The way she hummed under her breath while rinsing a plate. I told myself to stop staring, but my thoughts kept drifting toward questions I shouldn't ask. Who'd she had dinner with last night? Why was there only one plate drying on the rack? Was she lonely? "You're awfully quiet," she said without turning around. Just thinking, I replied. About what? I hesitated. About you, I guess. She looked over her shoulder, an unreadable expression on her face. That sounds dangerous. I wanted to laugh, but it stuck in my throat. Maybe it is. For a moment we didn't speak. I heard the rain outside pick up, soft but steady, like it had no intention of stopping. She set her glass down and came closer, leaning against the opposite side of the small table. You know, she began, I wasn't sure you'd help me when I knocked. Why? She gave a small shrug. You keep to yourself. I figured you might not want to get involved. I don't, I said honestly. With most people. And with me. I didn't answer and she didn't press. But her gaze lingered, searching, as if she could pull the truth from my silence. Something shifted in her then, a flicker of vulnerability. She looked away, and when she spoke, her voice was softer. It's been a long time since someone stayed. Just stayed. The admission hit me harder than I expected. I wanted to ask why. I wanted to tell her I would, as long as she let me. But all I managed was, I don't mind. Her lips curved faintly, almost like a thank you, almost like something else. She reached out and brushed her fingers along my arm, light enough that I could pretend it was nothing. But I didn't. You could stay a little longer, she said. And just like that, the rain outside felt like a reason not to leave. To step back but failing, ending on a they might cross the line moment. The rain blurred the view outside her window, streaking the glass in silver lines. We sat in the living room now, closer than before. The locked door nothing more than an excuse we'd both stopped mentioning. She had pulled a blanket over her legs, tucking her feet underneath, and I'd found myself leaning forward on the couch, elbows on my knees. Too close. Close enough that the scent of her shampoo slipped into my thoughts, soft and warm, like she'd just stepped out of the shower. You're staring again, she said quietly. I tried to look away, but she tilted her head, waiting. I wasn't. She smiled like she knew I was lying. You were. The silence stretched, and I told myself to say something neutral, anything to cool whatever was building between us. But then she sighed, almost to herself. I don't even know why I'm telling you this, but last month, I came home one night and realized I hadn't spoken to anyone all day. Not one person. It scared me. Her voice wasn't trembling, but the way she gripped the blanket told me she meant it. I didn't think. I just said, you could have knocked then, too. She looked at me, really looked, and the air between us shifted again. I felt it, a subtle pull forward like something inevitable. That's when her phone buzzed on the coffee table. The name on the screen flashed once before she grabbed it. Ethan. She didn't answer, just stared at it until it stopped. You can get it, I said. Her expression hardened slightly. No, it's fine. She said it face down. Not important. But her knee bounced once, betraying her. Whoever Ethan was, I suddenly hated him. I leaned back, forcing space between us. Maybe I should. She cut me off. Do you want to? The question caught me. I wanted to say yes, to do the safe, reasonable thing, to walk out into the rain and forget how close we'd come to something we couldn't take back. But I didn't answer fast enough. She reached forward, her hand brushing my knee. Barely a touch, but enough to send my thoughts scattering. The knock came then. Sharp, unexpected, from the hallway. We both froze. She glanced toward the door, then at me, lowering her voice. Don't say anything. The knocking stopped after a moment, followed by footsteps fading down the hall. We stayed still for a long beat, listening to the quiet return. Her hand was still on my knee. Neither of us moved it. When she finally spoke, her voice was low enough that I felt it more than heard it. Tell me you don't want to be here, she said, and I realized I couldn't, crossing it and ending on a charged question. The rain hadn't let up, and neither had the quiet between us. She still hadn't moved her hand from my knee. I should have said something to break the spell. A joke, an excuse, anything. But my mind was stuck on her earlier question. Tell me you don't want to be here. I shouldn't, I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. She tilted her head. That's not an answer. My pulse thudded in my ears. You know what I mean. Her eyes searched mine like she was trying to find the truth in them, and maybe she did, because she leaned back just enough to study me differently. Not like a neighbor or a landlord, but like someone who'd already decided I was dangerous in a way she might not want to resist. You remind me of someone, she said suddenly. Who? She looked away toward the window. Someone I should have fought harder for. Someone I let walk away. The words felt heavier than the rain outside. I wanted to ask if she meant it, if she was just filling the space with half-truths to keep me here. But the way her voice caught told me it wasn't a line. It was a wound. Before I could speak, she leaned forward slightly, her knee brushing mine again. And now here you are, sitting in my living room, looking at me like... She stopped herself, lips pressing together. Like what? I asked. Her eyes met mine again, steady now. Like you see me. The room seemed smaller after that, like the walls had shifted closer. I wanted to tell her she was right. I wanted to admit that I'd been seeing her. Really seeing her. Since the first time she'd passed me in the hallway with that distracted half-smile. But saying it out loud felt like stepping off a cliff. She reached for her glass, her fingers trembling just enough that I noticed. We can't, she started, then broke off, exhaling slowly. The sound of the rain filled the space where her words should have been. My chest felt tight. You're right, I said. We can't. But neither of us moved away. The clock ticked, her breathing steady but shallow, and my mind kept playing with the idea of leaning just a little closer, testing the line. She set the glass down, and for a long moment, she just looked at me. Not like she was waiting for me to speak, but like she was deciding whether to let me. Finally, she asked, if the door was unlocked right now, would you still be here? I didn't answer, and she didn't look away. From both of them, the question hung between us. Would you still be here if the door was unlocked? But before I could form an answer, her phone buzzed again. This time, she didn't ignore it. She picked it up, glanced at the screen, and then turned it toward me. It wasn't Ethan this time. It was my name. My chest tightened. You have my number? She set the phone down without answering. You left it on the rental application, she said, almost casually. But then her eyes softened. I've had it saved for months. It took a second for that to sink in. Months. Long before this afternoon. Long before the locked door. Why? I asked. Her expression wavered. Because I told myself I might need to call you if something went wrong in the building. That's the reason you told yourself, I said quietly. She didn't deny it. The air between us shifted again, heavier now. I thought back to every quick smile in the hallway, every lingering glance when she thought I wasn't looking. Had this been building for both of us all along? Before I could say more, she stood and walked to the window. You know, I almost did call you. 2 weeks ago. For what? She didn't turn around. I was sitting right here, feeling like the walls were closing in. I thought about asking if you wanted coffee. Then I decided it was a bad idea. Why? Finally, she looked at me, and her voice was sharper than before. Because you're too young. Because I'm supposed to be the one who knows better. Her words should have pushed me back, but instead they pulled me forward. I stood, closing the space between us without quite touching her. So what changed today? She hesitated, eyes flicking toward the locked door, then back to me. Maybe I got tired of pretending I didn't notice you. I opened my mouth to respond, but a sudden knock rattled the door. Urgent, louder than before. We both froze. Ms. Hart! A man's voice called from the hallway. You there? She tensed. I didn't recognize the voice, but she clearly did. It's my ex, she whispered, almost to herself. My pulse kicked into overdrive. The rain, the warmth, the closeness. All of it was replaced by a sharp jolt of reality. "What do you want me to do?" I asked. She looked at the door, then back at me, and for the first time all afternoon, she seemed genuinely unsure. "Stay out of sight. Don't make a sound." The knocking grew louder, and as I stepped back into the shadow of her hallway, I realized, whatever this was between us, I wasn't the only one hiding something. Connection we've built. The knocking finally stopped. The sound of footsteps faded down the hall, replaced once more by the steady patter of rain against the windows. I stayed in the shadows a moment longer, listening for any sign he might return. When I stepped back into the living room, she was still standing by the window, her arms wrapped around herself like she was holding something in. "You okay?" I asked. She nodded once, then shook her head. "I hate that he can still make me feel like this, like I owe him an answer." I took a cautious step toward her. "You don't owe him anything." Her eyes found mine, and for the first time all afternoon, there was no teasing in them, no deflection. Just a quiet, tired truth. "And what do I owe you?" I swallowed. "Nothing." Then, before I could stop myself, I added, "But I want you to want me here." She closed her eyes briefly, like the words hurt more than they should. "You think I don't?" "I don't know," I admitted. "You've been sending me mixed signals since the day we met. Smiling at me in the hallway, then looking away like you regretted it. Today, locking the door didn't change anything. It just made it harder to ignore." Her lips pressed together, but she didn't deny it. I took another step closer. "So tell me now, if I walk out of here, am I just your tenant again?" Her gaze held mine, unflinching. "If you walk out now, you're the one who left." The words landed like a challenge. The rain sounded louder, the room smaller. I could have kissed her then. I wanted to, but it felt like that wasn't the point. Not yet. Instead, I reached for her hand. It was warm, tense in my grip until she let out a breath and her fingers softened against mine. "I'm not good at this," she said quietly. "Letting people in. It never ends the way I hope." "Then don't think about the end," I said. "Just think about right now." Her thumb brushed over mine, the smallest motion, but it felt like a decision. She didn't pull away. We stood like that for what felt like a long time, the sound of the rain settling into a steady rhythm. I didn't know what tomorrow would look like, or if the locked door had been luck, fate, or just a broken latch. All I knew was that she wasn't letting go. And for now, neither was I. By the time the rain eased into a faint drizzle, the lock finally gave way with a reluctant click. I half expected the moment to break us, to turn the warmth between us back into hallway nods and polite distance. But neither of us moved to open the door. She glanced at it, then back at me. "Guess you're free now," she said, her voice unreadable. "Yeah," I answered, "but I don't think I want to leave just yet." She didn't smile, but her eyes softened. I think we both knew something had shifted, not just this afternoon, but in the way we'd started seeing each other long before the door ever locked. I thought she was untouchable. Someone I noticed from the safe distance of my own apartment. Someone I wouldn't dare to get too close to. Now I'd seen her pacing by the window, ignoring calls she didn't want to answer, admitting she hated the quiet when it lasted too long. And she'd seen me, too. The way I filled silence with questions I didn't mean to ask. The way I lingered in rooms where I didn't belong. "I don't know what this is yet," she said finally. "But I don't want it to be nothing." That was enough for me. The rest of the afternoon passed in the kind of ease you only get after a storm. Not perfect, but real. We talked about little things. Her plants, my classes, how the hallway always smelled faintly of toast. Every so often, our eyes met, and it didn't feel like we had to look away anymore. When I finally did leave, she walked me to the door. I stepped into the hallway, the air smelling clean after the rain, and turned back to see her leaning on the frame, watching me like she wanted to say something. Instead, she just said, "See you around." It sounded casual, but it wasn't. Over the next week, I saw her differently. Not just as the woman across the hall, but as someone who'd let me in literally and otherwise. And every time we passed each other, there was a flicker in her expression that told me the locked door hadn't been the end. It had been the start. Moral? Sometimes the line between staying and leaving isn't about doors or locks at all. It's about the moment you decide the risk of being seen is worth more than the safety of staying hidden. And I think we both decided that day.